Wicked Will Rise, Chapter 10. It was the dead of night, and Ozma and I were making our way through the jungle. Yet again, I was reminded of the dream I'd had that wasn't quite a dream. The feeling of déjà vu was so visceral, tingling in my pores, setting the hairs on my arms on end. I ignored it and pushed forward, following Ozma, and tried not to let it get to me. I was holding a tiny orb of flame in my palm, just bright enough to light our way, but still the woods around us were black, and we were moving more quickly than I thought possible. Ozma walked ahead of me with a strange purpose, not seeming to even need my light to see by. She didn't hesitate with a single step, but she didn't seem to be following any particular path either. She was weaving and zigzagging through the thick clusters of trees, sometimes doubling back on herself, sometimes groping oddly at the air as if feeling for something. In her flowing white dress, with her luminous ivory skin flickering in the glow of my flame, she looked like a teenage ghost. I just hoped she knew what she was doing, because I thought there was a distant possibility that she was leading me in a circle. With every step we took, I second-guessed myself. Was I doing the right thing? I didn't feel like it. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so alone. I wished I had Star. I wished I had Indigo or Ollie or anyone. I wished I had Nox. Ozma didn't count. Tomorrow I would try to summon Pete back. At least he would be someone to talk to. But for now, I just wanted to get out of the woods, find a place to rest, and take stock of things in the daylight. So I walked, letting Ozma lead the way. My hand was clenched hard around my knife, which had appeared in my hand without even being summoned, the way it always did when I sensed danger or felt out of my element. The knife was beginning to feel so much like a part of me, like an extension of my body, that it was easy to forget Nox was the one who had given it to me, had spent hours carving the bird-shaped hilt himself, not just because he wanted me to be able to protect myself, but because he wanted me to have something that he had made, something that was just mine. I felt a pang of loneliness at that thought, but instead of getting sad, I tried to take that feeling and use it, to shape the pointless emotion into something more like determination. It felt almost like working with magic. The way you could take it and mold it into something different from what it had started as, into something you could actually see. The thing about Nox was that I didn't even know him that well. I really didn't. We had kissed, twice? 3 times? And most of the time that we hadn't been kissing, it wasn't even obvious that we were friends, much less anything more than that. Look, it didn't matter what we were to each other. It didn't matter whether I really knew him or not. I just knew that I wanted to find him. But Nox wasn't why I was roaming through the dark forest in the middle of the night. It wasn't doing it for Mombi either, or for the Order, or for Ozma, although I had to admit I was starting to feel a certain amount of protectiveness around her. I wasn't doing it for Oz or for justice. Some of those things were part of it, but they weren't the main reason. For some reason I had kept it from myself, because it had made me feel somehow selfish. But isn't everyone allowed to be selfish sometimes? The real person I was doing this was for me. In my old life, I had been picked on by Madison Pendleton, taken advantage of by my mother, and ignored by pretty much everyone else, because I had never been special. I had never been powerful. When I dreamed of getting away from Kansas, what I'd really wanted was to find a place I could matter, where I could be someone and have a purpose. Now, I found the place where I belonged. Yeah, it might have been nice if it had been a fairyland with fewer problems, someplace a little harder to mistake for a nightmare. But on the other hand, the more I settled into this nightmare, the more I began to realize that the insanity of this place was what gave me the feeling of purpose that I'd never had before. Before Oz, I'd never been needed by anyone other than my mother, and apparently I wasn't even much help to her. Oz, though, I could try to fix, and I was going to. Some people spend their whole lives searching for the one thing they can do to say, I changed the world. I had found that thing. I might not be able to accomplish it, but I was going to die trying. So call me selfish. But that didn't mean I wasn't scared. I tried not to think about what else was out there in the woods, in the dark, beyond the glow cast by my fire. The jungle might not have been the lion's domain anymore, but there were still monsters who lived there, and they didn't need the king of beasts to tell them I would make a delicious snack. Lions, tigers, bears, none of those really bothered me. It was the thought of things I wouldn't be able to put a name to. It wasn't just an abstract fear of creepy crawlies. Ever since we'd left the monkey's treetop village, I'd had the sensation that we weren't alone. I couldn't quite place the feeling or give any evidence to prove my suspicion was right, but I could feel a lurking heavy presence somewhere just over my shoulder, creeping behind me through the trees, almost close enough to reach out and grab me. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination. But after an hour of walking, I heard a telltale crunch of branches and a faint wheezing grunt. I spun around and shone my flame up and down in the dark, but the only movement I saw was a giant spider half skittering up the trunk of a tree to take cover from the light. There was a time when just that would have been enough to make me running for my life. Now it was nothing. I knew in my gut that there was someone else, though. Call it magical insight or just some old Kansas intuition. There was something bigger, badder, and something dangerous. It had been stalking us the whole time. I tried to shift my focus, the way I've done earlier in the day, trying to see whatever was out there was using magic to hide, but nothing revealed itself except for the vague shimmer of energy that coated everything in Oz. And considering how jumpy I was feeling right now, I couldn't be sure that even that was anything other than my overactive imagination. Ozma had noticed that I was hanging back, and had looped around to join me. She looked at me curiously and gazed out at the forest. "Mommy," she said. A slow smile spread across her face, and then more urgently she repeated it. "Mommy!" Between her demented smile and the flickering light in her face, she looked like a horrible, beautiful jack-o'-lantern. Mommy? What was she talking to me? Was she trying to say Mombi? Or was it something else? None of the options really reassured me. I put a finger to my lips, and Ozma narrowed her eyes and nodded as if she understood. Without any further warning, I let the flame in my hand extinguish. Everything went black, and I was already a shadow, effortlessly sinking into the in-between place I'd somehow learned to unlock over the next few days. Then I was back, myself again, 10 paces behind the place where I'd started. I couldn't waste any time. I had to move before our pursuer figured out what I was doing. In one swift motion, I stabbed my knife into the air and brought it down in a crackling arc that lit the whole forest for a split second, as if I let off a flashbulb. But then split second was enough. I saw it. The thing that had been following us was crouched menacingly behind a tree, its shoulders heaving and muscular. It spun its head toward me, and I saw its yellow eyes staring back in 2 thin yellow slits. A chill went up my spine as I thought of the cloaked figures I'd seen in my dreams last night. But those had been witches, and when this thing rose up into its hind legs, I knew that it was not a witch. It was a monster. An enormous ball of orange fire was already bursting forth from my outstretched palm, and before I could see my flame hit the target, I was teleporting straight for where I'd been hiding. When I reappeared, I expected to hear whatever it was screaming as it burned, but I'd gotten cocky. When I materialized, there was no screams. My fire had already extinguished itself, and I couldn't see anything in the blackness. Hopefully that meant it couldn't see me either. Instead of trying to light things up, I decided I could try to use the dark to my advantage. I mumbled a few words to cast a simple amplification spell. This way, even if I couldn't see my attacker, I'd be able to hear it. I listened, turning in a careful clockwise circle, until I had picked out the creature's thumping heartbeat and labored breathing. It came up with nothing and stumbled forward. Suddenly, before I recovered my balance, a flying ball of muscle hit me out of nowhere, like a bag of bricks. I grunted loudly and, instead of falling, let my body roll into a sideways somersault, and then flipped easily back to my feet. I was fast, but this thing was faster. It had ricocheted away from me before I even had managed to get a good look at it. Back into the trees where, even with my magically heightened senses, I could barely make out the sound it made as it crawled from branch to branch. Just a few minutes ago, I had been feeling lonely and a little helpless. In other words, I could use a good fight. "Come and get me," I shouted, brandishing my knife, knowing I barely needed it. Once again, my loneliness had turned like magic into fury. I could kill this thing with my bare hands if I had to. "Come on, asshole," I screamed, my voice reverberating through the trees. "I don't care who you are. Mess with me again. I dare you." I stopped, picking through all the sounds around me until I heard a soft heartbeat a few feet away behind a tree. But when I listened more closely, I realized it didn't belong to my stalker. From its speedy, even pace, I knew it could only be Ozma. No one but her could remain so calm in the midst of all this. So I tuned it out, glad she was safe, and then focused on all the other sounds. I scanned through all of it, casting aside the noises that weren't relevant. The crickets and owls in the trees, the snakes slithering through the grass, the wind in the leaves, building a picture of my surroundings in my head. When I listened hard, it was almost like being able to see again. It only took me a minute, then I found it. Thump, thump, thump. The noise wasn't coming from anywhere near where I'd been looking for it, but once I found it, it was unmistakable. The beat's heart was racing from adrenaline. Its breathing was heavy and hungry. But I didn't want to use the same trick twice, and so instead of throwing another fireball, I decided to try something new. I called down a bolt of lightning from the sky to fry my mystery attacker before it knew what hit it. There was a sizzle, and the electrical smell of ozone, as a blue bolt zigzagged in through the leaves, striking at the place where I'd guessed my target to be hiding. The creature shrieked as my spell connected. But if I thought that would be enough to kill my enemy, I was wrong again. There was a whistling sound of a vine swooping through the air, and then the creature was on top of me. Its legs wrapped around my midsection, and it scratched at my face with giant, almost human hands. I felt its claws draining blood, but I spun on my heel, using the thing's momentum against it, tackling it to the jungle floor. We landed together, me on top, and I pressed my forearm to its chest, pinning it, whatever it was, to the ground. "Game over," I said. It had been easier than I expected, and I found myself almost disappointed that my workout had been cut short. I was getting pretty good at this. I raised my knife to go in for the kill. I didn't really care what it was I was killing. I just wanted a fight to be over. But then it spoke in a voice I recognized. A surprisingly squeaky voice. No, Uncle, I already give up." It couldn't be. But who else sounded like that? I willed my knife to glow, illuminating my now captive enemy. "You!" I exclaimed. Looking up at me in shameful, pathetic defeat was none other than Queen Lulu of the Wingless Ones. 1 second ago, I had been ready and eager to kill. Now I wasn't sure what to do. I looked over to Ozma, who was leaning against a tree a few feet away, observing the whole scene with a kind of bird-brained calm. After a moment's pause, she gave the monkey a dopey, sad little wave. Under me, Lulu blanched at the sight of Ozma.